Hi, I'm Ian.
And I'm Mandra. Welcome back to the show, where we take complex topics and, well, we really explore them in detail for you.
Exactly. Think of us as your guides to maybe what's really important in all the information out there. Today, we've been looking into some really critical areas for the world of rare metals and minerals, and also the, intricate landscape of export controls, particularly how they impact advanced technology in even fields like aerospace.
Yeah, it might sound really technical at first, but trust us, the things we'll get into here touch so much of our modern world. I mean, from the phones in our pockets to global security and, well, the future of tech.
Right.
Our aim today is really to unpack the key points from some recent research and reports we've been examining.
So what's the core story we're tracing today then?
We're exploring this, quiet global struggle happening over the building blocks of the future. So that means understanding the strategic importance of critical minerals, things like rare earths, and the big challenges in securing reliable supplies, especially when, production is really concentrated.
Makes sense.
Then we'll look at how countries are increasingly using restrictions on trade, specifically export controls, not just for old school security reasons, but as a powerful tool of, well, economic strategy.
Ah, okay.
And we'll focus on how this plays out in key tech sectors like semiconductors and, yes, even cutting-edge areas like aviation tech.
Okay, let's start with those building blocks, the rare metals and minerals. Looking into this, it's immediately clear just how crucial these are. Things like cobalt, lithium, and especially those rare earth elements, or REEs. They're absolutely essential for, well, everything from your phone to advanced manufacturing and defense systems.
And, one of the really key things that jumps out from the research is just the vulnerability in the supply chains.
How so?
Well, a government report we looked at defined a critical mineral as one that's crucial for advanced manufacturing and faces significant supply chain risks. And it turns out, for a lot of these, countries like the U.S. rely incredibly heavily on foreign sources.
That reliance. Yeah, it sparked some big efforts. We saw one U.S. strategy detailed in a report called A Federal Strategy to Ensure Secure and Reliable Supplies of Critical Minerals.
Right.
It lays out a whole plan to try and reduce that vulnerability. I found it fascinating, covering everything from boosting R&D into new ways to get them out, finding alternatives.
Yes, and exploring sources beyond just, traditional mining. They're looking into what they call secondary sources.
Which mean?
Basically recycling materials from old products, like your old phone or computer.
Gotcha.
And even unconventional sources, like trying to extract minerals from, say, mine waste or coal byproducts, even geothermal brines.
Wow. Like hunting for treasure in trash heaps.
Kind of, yeah, exactly. Finding value where you wouldn't expect it.
Now, one study we saw really focused on those rare earth elements, the REEs. They've got these unique magnetic and electronic properties, right? Indispensable stuff.
Crucial.
And this study, it really highlighted China's almost total dominance across the whole processing chain. Think about this. According to industry data cited in the study, China produces something like 97% of the initial rare earth ore.
97%.
0.97% of the oxide it's refined into. And get this, 100% of the refined metal. And they also make most of the powerful magnets made from these REEs.
That level of concentration, it's not just an economic footnote. It creates an extreme strategic risk.
How so?
Well, the study pointed out that if China decided to, say, restrict access to these processed materials or the magnets, it could literally halt production or drastically jack up costs for a huge range of industries, including critical defense applications, many needing a tiny specific magnet for, I don't know, a fighter jet component.
Right.
And the entire global supply for that refined material basically runs through one country. That's a vulnerability.
And building your own capacity domestically isn't like flipping a switch, is it?
Oh, definitely not. One government report from back in 2010 estimated it could take 10 to 15 years for a new processing facility to come online.
10 to 15 years, wow.
Yeah, huge capital costs, incredibly complex permitting processes. It's a long haul.
And those permitting delays, the research highlighted them as a major hurdle for accessing potential domestic resources here, right?
Absolutely. That and another big challenge mentioned was insufficient geological mapping data, like knowing where the stuff actually is in detail.
How bad is it?
Well, one finding indicated less than 18% of the U.S. landmass has been mapped at the kind of scale you need for detailed exploration.
About that a fifth. Okay.
Yeah, so part of the strategy involves improving that mapping, making data accessible to help private companies explore,
Right.
and also trying to streamline those permitting and review processes, plus looking at the workforce side, too.
Workforce.
Yeah, the research suggests challenges like, an aging workforce in mining and geology and fewer university programs focusing on it.
So it's a really complex puzzle.
It really is. Securing these materials involves R&D, domestic policy on land use, regulation, workforce, and crucially, working with allies internationally. It's not just one thing.
Okay, so we've seen the challenge with the physical materials and processing, but the competition isn't just about raw stuff. It's also about controlling the advanced components, the brains of technology, you could say.
Exactly.
And that brings us squarely into the world of export controls and how they seem to be changing.
It's fascinating, isn't it, how export controls are evolving. The research suggests that both the U.S. and, other major players like China are increasingly using these restrictions on trade, not just for traditional military security, but as a tool of what they call economic statecraft, basically using economic power to achieve bigger strategic goals.
Right, using trade as leverage.
Precisely. One commentary even called this dynamic a kind of symbiosis, where one country's actions with controls can sort of provoke a mirroring response from others.
And we've seen examples of that playing out, haven't we?
We have. The research points to times when China has tightened its own export controls, maybe adding U.S. companies to restrictive lists, or requiring licenses for certain critical minerals, seemingly reacting to U.S. measures.
So on the U.S. side, what tools are being used? The sources mentioned several.
Yeah, quite a few. There's the Entity List that's managed by the Department of Commerce's Bureau of Industry and Security, BIS for short. They're the main agency here.
Okay, BIS and the Entity List.
It restricts exports to specific foreign companies, organizations, or even governments that are believed to be acting against U.S. national security or foreign policy interests. And the research indicates there are, hundreds of China-based entities on this list.
Hundreds. Okay. What else?
There are also lists like the Military End User List, the MEU list, which flags parties involved in military activities in certain countries, and the Unverified List, or UVL.
Unverified.
Yeah, for cases where the U.S. government couldn't confirm, who the final recipient of an export would actually be. BIS uses both to help companies know who they need to be extra careful about trading with.
Right. Red flags for exporters.
Exactly. And then there's perhaps one of the most significant tools discussed, the Foreign Direct Product Rule, or FDPR.
That one sounds complicated.
It is, and it's powerful.
Yeah.
Basically, it lets the U.S. restrict foreign companies from exporting certain items made using U.S. technology or software, even if the item itself isn't made in the U.S.
Wait, even if it's made somewhere else?
Yep. If it's going to restricted parties or for prohibited uses, think of it like this. If you use our special recipe or our unique ingredients, we get a say in who you can sell the final cake to, even if you baked it in your own kitchen overseas.
Wow. That's a long reach.
It is, and it's especially relevant when we talk about advanced technologies. The research really highlights semiconductors, computer chips, and artificial intelligence, AI, as key areas being targeted by these kinds of controls.
Right. The really cutting-edge stuff.
Absolutely. One report detailed specific U.S. restrictions that came in, I think it was October 2022, aimed right at advanced computing chips, certain equipment needed to make semiconductors, and even preventing U.S. persons, citizens, or residents from supporting advanced chip development or production in China.
And they even defined advanced, right?
Yeah.
Using technical specs.
They did. They set specific thresholds, like chips below a certain size measured in nanometers. The smaller the nanometer number, generally the more advanced the chip.
Okay, so can you give us the simple version? Why is it controlling these specific chips and the tools to make them such a big strategic focus?
Sure. Think of advanced semiconductors as the super high-performance brains of modern technology.
Okay, the brains.
Yeah. They power everything from massive supercomputers and complex AI systems to the most sophisticated military hardware. So controlling access to the most powerful brains or the tools needed to manufacture them is seen as a direct way to impact another country's ability to develop, say, cutting-edge military capabilities or advanced surveillance technologies.
That makes sense. And the research shows China is investing heavily in exactly those areas, right? AI, advanced manufacturing.
Absolutely. And also prioritizing things like aerospace, including sensitive stuff like airplane engines and gas turbines and robotics. They often use a strategy called military-civil fusion to leverage civilian industry for military advancement.
Military-civil fusion.
Yeah, blurring the lines.
Oh.
And they're actively working towards becoming self-reliant in these critical areas, trying to identify and overcome technology choke points where they currently depend on other countries.
So when we talk about things like an airplane component export ban, well, maybe not one single ban with that name.
Right.
The sources suggest the advanced technologies used in areas like aviation engines are definitely caught up in this broader strategic competition.
Right.
And subject to these export controls.
Precisely, because those capabilities are prioritized by potential rivals. This also includes critical tools like electronic design automation or EDA software.
EDA?
Yeah, that's the highly specialized software used to actually design these incredibly complex chips and systems. The sources mentioned controls applied via that foreign direct product rule, specifically restricting access to EDA tools for designing advanced semiconductors.
So it's not just the finished product, it's the design tools, the manufacturing equipment, the foundational tech.
Exactly. It really underscores how these controls are moving upstream, focusing on the fundamental ability to design and produce advanced technology.
And this connects to investment screening too, doesn't it?
It does. The U.S. has CFI-US, the Committee on Foreign Investment in the United States, which reviews foreign money coming into the U.S. for national security risks.
Right, we've heard of CFI-US.
But the sources also discussed moves to screen U.S. money going out, outbound investment.
Screening U.S. investments abroad. Wow.
The idea is to prevent U.S. capital or expertise from inadvertently helping potential adversaries develop sensitive technologies in key areas.
Okay. Has anything actually happened there?
Yes. A recent executive order, I think August 2023, started this process, but it's focused very narrowly, at least initially.
How narrow?
On U.S. investments in just 3 key areas: semiconductors, quantum information technologies, and AI. And only in specific countries of concern. Experts called it a small yard, high fence approach.
Small yard, high fence, meaning tight controls, but only on a limited patch of ground.
Exactly. Target the most critical stuff, but don't try to block everything.
But these controls, they aren't a perfect solution, are they? The research mentioned limitations.
Oh, for sure. They're often seen as, well, time-limited. They can definitely delay another country's development, maybe significantly.
But not stop it forever.
Probably not prevent it entirely in the long run, no. It's also incredibly hard to track everything globally, all the companies, all the transactions.
I can imagine.
And getting all your allies on the same page, multilaterally, about exactly which technologies to control and how, that's tough. Existing international regimes, like the Wassenaar Arrangement.
That's the one for arms and dual-use goods.
Right. They often focus on more traditional items. Adapting them to today's super fast-evolving, dual-use technologies, things useful for both civilian and military purposes, is really tricky.
And can't companies try to get around the rules?
They certainly try. We even saw an example mentioned where Chinese AI firms were reportedly using cloud computing servers, renting time on powerful computers located elsewhere that were powered by advanced chips they couldn't buy directly, potentially sidestepping some restrictions.
Interesting loophole. Okay, so we've covered a lot, the vital materials, the strategic controls on tech. Why does all this matter to, our listeners?
Well, think about it this way. The minerals we talked about, they literally power the electronics you use every single day. And they're essential for the technologies coming down the pike. And these export controls, this strategic competition, it shapes the entire global tech landscape. It influences what products get developed, how supply chains are structured, where things get made, and even how fast technology advances in different parts of the world.
And it's not just about gadgets. These dynamics are directly tied to, well, national security and economic competitiveness in a world that's really interconnected, but also, let's face it, intensely competitive.
Exactly. Understanding these forces helps make sense of global tensions, trade disputes you read about, and the big policy decisions countries are grappling with right now.
Okay, so before we wrap up, maybe a final thought for people to chew on.
Here's something to consider based on everything we've explored today. If getting critical minerals is seen as vital for national security, and controlling access to advanced technology is a key tool for military and economic advantage, how might future global tensions or even conflicts play out? Maybe not just with traditional military means, ships, planes, troops, but through strategic moves made along these global supply chains for the essential materials and technologies that basically power our modern world.
Wow. Conflict fought through supply chains and tech access. That is definitely a lot to think about. We've really explored the strategic weight of critical minerals and this evolving landscape of export controls and tech competition today.
We certainly have. We hope this exploration into the research has given you some valuable insights and maybe, hopefully, sparked some new questions of your own.
And hey, if you found today's content interesting or helpful, please do take a moment to like and subscribe. It really does help the channel tremendously and allows us to keep bringing you these explorations into complex topics.
Thanks so much for joining us.
We'll be back soon with more.